Good evening. I'm here and I am going to read tonight. I'm going to get my schedule a little figured out, make sure that my reminders are working properly so that I can be doing these on the days that I promise I'll be there and on time. So, um, today I'm going to read the beginning of The Last 13. And I might actually go through these books, but I've been doing the Anne of Green Gables series, which meet with me on Tuesday. We'll get back into this. We're getting about halfway through right now. Still about halfway through. And I'll continue that book on Tuesday. But today I wanted to read from the last 13. I would have chosen a different book, but I just got my other books today. So I'll read the beginning of I think it's The Midnight Unicorn is the first book, but I got my unicorn books and I've been so excited to get those. So I will read that next week. And I think I'm going to add in an extra day or two so we can get through Anne of Green Gables because I don't know about you, a week is a long time to wait for a book. So I think I'll start reading like maybe 3 times a week and we can get through the series. Anyway, without further ado, this is The Last 13 by James Fellin. This book there's 13 books. There's 13 people. And this is the back right here. I'm going to read that first. It says 13 books, 13 nightmares, 1 destiny. I click my fingers and everybody dies. Sam wakes from his nightmare to discover the terrifying reality. It will come true. Kidnapped from school and finding out his parents aren't who he thinks they are, Sam is suddenly running from danger at every turn. Nothing will ever be the same again. With his life and identity shattered, Sam's salvation is tied to an ancient prophecy. He is in the final battle to save the world, up against an enemy plotting to destroy us all. He alone can find the last 13. Are you one of them? So, we are going to start with this. I'm going to read the beginning because there's just a little bit about 3 entities in the book, so this will give you a little insight into that. The Academy. School for teaching gifted students to true dream. Professor Tom McPherson follows a long history of Academy mantra whereby true dreamers use wisdom, studies from history, and obtainment of knowledge to have powerful influence across the world, ruled by the Dreamer Council. Enterprise organization committed to economic gain undertakes scientific research and genetic testing to uncover the cause of true dreaming. Director Jack Palmer battles with his own agents who see true dreamers as potential weapons. Enemy. A nightmare creature comes to life. Solaris has haunted true dreamers' nightmare for centuries and manifests for the final battle to rule the world. An armored shadowy figure who unleashes destruction upon anything that stands in the way of ultimate power. The thing the last 13 must stop, or it will destroy us all. Alright. The Last 13, Book 1, which is 13. Breaking news. In recent weeks, a group has emerged with what can perhaps be described as a special gift or ability. Their dreams come true. Although unaware of it now, these individuals will not only save the world, but change it forever. They are our last hope in a battle of good versus evil. This transformation from ordinary to extraordinary, this journey will not occur overnight. Every story has a beginning. Chapter 1. I click my fingers, the dark, deep, scratchy voice says, and everyone around us dies. I struggle to focus on the dark, imposing figure before me. Behind, there's a crater of shattered pavement as though it has crashed down to earth from the sky. Concrete dust coats its black full-body armor, which shimmers slightly as though in a heat haze. The face is completely masked. Even the eyes and mouth are hidden behind wire mesh. The only chinks in the sleek power, thinking all the while you are saving these foolish people. Prophecy? Enough. You know why I'm here, boy. Hand it over. I've no idea what it is talking about, but then I sense a weight in my pocket. I have something important that this thing wants, this heavy round object. So now I know why it is here. I have what you want. Yes, you do. Where is it? I reach into my pocket and retrieve a dark crystal sphere. Yes, that's it. The blurred figure seems to shimmer at a higher frequency as though excited. Give it to me. And then, then, then I might let your friend live. And everyone else? The figure shrugs, and every movement of its form leaves a slight disturbance in the air around it, a smoky haze. It's as though I can sense a grisly smile behind the mask. One click of my fingers. Its voice quiets, becoming even more ominous. Fall at any second. What are you doing? It says, the amplified voice more urgent. You'll kill us all anyway. No! The tall figure takes a stride towards me. Don't be a fool. I will if you don't promise. It steps towards me again, and I toss the crystal up into the air. The figure moves in a blur, diving forward, reaching out for the falling sphere. I lunge towards Laura, pulling her to me. Sam, what did you— Get down, I yell as we hit the ground. The figure grasps the crystal. As it does, it raises its other hand. I am too late. Fire radiates out. Everything around us, people, cars, buildings, glow from within and then explodes in a quick succession. Ash and debris fill the air as Laura begins to glow and grows warm in my embrace. I close my eyes, and before she has a chance to flash brightly, both she and I are gone. No! Sam yelled. He sat bolt upright in bed. Oh, Chapter 2. No! Sam yelled. He sat bolt upright in bed, bathed in a cold sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. Today in Vancouver, a mostly warm, sunny day, the radio DJ announced. Vancouver. Can't believe it's been a year since we moved here. Sam looked at the alarm clock. 7:43 a.m. His eyes automatically went to the black notebook next to the clock. He knew he should fill it in. Follow this little ritual his dream specialist psychiatrist had been making him do all year to help improve his sleep, to keep the nightmares away. By writing it down, he was meant to relive all the horrifying details blow by blow, just so they could explore it in their sessions. Yeah, it's working great. With a sigh, Sam picked up the book and started scribbling down what he remembered from the nightmare. A friend called Laura. She had red hair, green eyes, looked about 25. His handwriting was shaky, but he concentrated and pressed hard, steadying his hand and recording what he could. As he recalled the rest of the nightmare, he felt details already slipping away, becoming lost to the waking world. So he wrote in a scribbled frenzy. He finished by writing the last 13, then underlining and circling it for emphasis. The last 13 what? Sam sat on the edge of his bed, resting his forehead on his hands, elbows on his knees, scrunching the lush carpet between his toes. His messy brown hair was wet with sweat, and his heart was still racing as though he'd been running. He closed his eyes and took some deep breaths, settling himself. But the wrongness of the nightmare was almost tangible, and he knew it would keep him on edge all day. The bedroom door opened. Sam's dad, Mike, stood in the doorway. "Come on, Sam. You're going to be late." "Yeah, I know. I'll hustle," Sam replied. "Your mother has made breakfast. I can drive you to the bus stop, but you've got to hurry." Sam nodded. His dad turned to leave, but Sam saw him hesitate. Scout, the family beagle, ran into the room and licked Sam's clammy toes. "You all right?" Mike asked. Sam looked up at him bleary-eyed. "Yeah, I'm I'm fine. Be out in a sec." Mike watched Sam scratching Scout's head, then looked over to the notebook. "Bad dream again?" Sam nodded. "You made your notes?" Sam nodded. His dad looked at the book like he was contemplating reading it, but then let it be. "Well, all right then. Get ready for school. We don't need your mom going all supernova on us." Sam smiled. "Okay, Dad." But his dad just stood there watching him. "You want me to cancel your jiu-jitsu class tonight?" "Nah, I'll be fine. In fact, it'll be great to go and kick some butt." Mike nodded and left, his heavy footsteps fading away. Scout's dopey face stared up at Sam, so friendly, always inquisitive, always understanding in some inexplicable way. Sam tried to remember more of his nightmare, but couldn't. It had already faded to next to nothing. The psychiatrist his parents had sent him to, Dr. Dark, said it would get easier, that he'd conditioned himself to remember and write episodes down verbatim. That hasn't really worked out yet. Through analyzing the notes, Sam could supposedly learn to control where his dreams took him. Somehow, through that, he'd have fewer nightmares. Yeah, right. 3 months later, and still the terrors woke him every other night. Still he didn't remember anything but a few small details, like running away from someone or from something on fire. It was always the fire that woke him. Sam walked into the bathroom, had a shower, and got out before the egg timer on the soap dish went off. His mother Jane's latest project was saving water. Maybe a longer shower would calm me down, give me fewer nightmares. Thought of that, Mom? In the mirror, Sam looked for changes, but he was still average height, average build, brown eyes, and brown hair. Mr. Average. The scar from the accident was still there, but Sam was hoping for rippling abs and pumped guns. He'd been playing all kinds of sports to help tire him out and sleep better, but there was nothing to show for it. Maybe when I turn 16. "Maybe when you get bitten by a radioactive spider," Sam said to his reflection, and he smiled. In his room, he threw on a fresh school shirt and yesterday's pants. "Sam, this is your last chance," his mom's voice cut through the house, a knife in and out of his skull. "Breakfast!" Sam sat at the kitchen table. His 2-year-old brother Ben was next to him, alternating between sculpting a mountain out of his scrambled eggs and pushing baked beans up his nose. "Thanks for breakfast, Mom," Sam said. He poured a glass of juice, but he was not paying attention, momentarily lost in a daydream, and he let the liquid overflow. "Sam, not again!" his mother grizzled as he quickly mopped it up. Bits and pieces of the nightmare were trickling through his mind, distracting him. A fire alarm went off, making Sam jump from the table. His mom ran over to the gas stove and pulled off the kitchen towel that had caught fire, dousing it in the sink with water. "It's okay, son," Mike said, and Sam sat down, nodding. Sam's parents sat opposite him, watching, as if waiting for him to fess up, to explain something, either about his problem with fire or his latest nightmare. "Sam, are you okay?" his mother asked as he moved his food around aimlessly on the plate. Sam remained silent, lost in a vague memory of his dream. "Sam," his dad said, his voice soft. "Yeah?" Sam snapped out of it, looked up. "Is something wrong?" his mom asked. "I'm sorry about the towel just now, but you're not eating your breakfast, which is a first. It's like you're not really here." I I'm okay," Just tired. I had another nightmare. Or something. A nightmare? His parents remained expectant, gently prodding him to continue. About what? The fire again? No, not exactly. It was about... I honestly don't know. Sam drank his juice. I can only remember bits of it. Sam's dad put his newspaper down, sipped his coffee, and looked from his wife to Sam. You want to tell us about it? His dad offered. Take your time. If you miss your bus, I can drop you off later. Maybe we can even book you in to see Doctor... No, it's okay, thanks. Sam hurriedly shook his head and with great concentration ate a forkful of scrambled eggs. His mother asked, Was it a new dream last night? Sam nodded. Did you write it down? Yeah, some. I mean, I tried. Sam's parents glanced at each other. Ben threw a piece of toast. Sam ducked, and it bounced off the wall and onto the floor where Scout vacuumed it up without chewing. Sam, his mom said, you know you need to write it all down. I really tried. You'll forget the details otherwise. I want to forget them. Sam pushed his plate away. His parents were silent. I want to forget all of it. I want to forget what happened to Bill. Sam's parents' worried look was enough to make him realize he had scared them. No way was he getting out of a visit to Dr. Dark now. The fire that had killed his best friend last year was the reason he'd started seeing a psychiatrist in the first place, and Sam knew he'd have to work hard to make his parents understand that this dream was something new. It was a really horrible nightmare, okay? Worse this time. It wasn't about the fire, but it was so vivid. Everything around me, people were getting killed by this thing, this evil thing. Thing? Well, yeah, I think it was a man. It was a tall, dark figure in some kind of special suit, all black, fully masked, kind of looked like he was shimmering. Go on. He was able to... He shot fire out of his hand, and Sam said, feeling a little stupid saying out loud and all too aware of the concern mentioning fire again would raise. And I think he was able to freeze everything. The cars, all the people, time itself. Sam strained to think back, to recall it. Everyone was frozen, and this figure wanted... I can't remember exactly. Something about a prophecy, a crystal ball, and something about a final 13. The last thing I remember was him clicking his fingers and everything caught fire. There was this big flash, and it was hot and bright. Then I woke up screaming. Is that enough detail for you? His parents shared a concerned look. Then his father looked away, and his mother looked straight at him. You know, we're only trying to help you, his mother said. You need to accept that Bill's death wasn't your fault. There was no way you or anyone could have saved him. It's a miracle you got out when you did. This new nightmare could just be you finding another way to punish yourself. But we can help you get better. If, as Dr. Dark says, you can train yourself to remember. Sam stood up angrily and headed for his bedroom, but then stopped by the kitchen door, turned around, and said quietly, It wasn't about that. This thing, this evil guy, he was going to kill them all. I remember that. No matter what I did, he was going to kill them. Who was it? His dad asked. I don't know, but he sure knew me. Sam, his mom said. What exactly did he look like? I told you. He wore a mask, Sam said, slowly forcing himself to recall more specific details. He wore a black mask, which even covered his eyes, and a black bodysuit. It was in a constant state of movement, like it was a heat mirage, and I could tell, through his voice and his motions, that he was enjoying himself being in control like that. And then everyone died. He burned them all. Dressed all in black, said Dad thoughtfully. And his voice? His voice was weird, Sam said, remembering the tone and volume of it, like it was amplified and scrambled or something. Metallic, disguised. Okay, his dad said. Get your things, I'll drive you to school, and we'll make you an appointment with Dr. Dark for this afternoon. Sam went to get ready. His parents seemed to be taking him seriously, which made it even harder to shake off the feeling that something was now suddenly wrong in the world. Very wrong. Chapter 3. 2 hours later, Sam was sitting in his high school classroom. The room was quiet as the science teacher, Mr. Cole, waited for the students to finish a surprise test. Sam couldn't concentrate, as parts of his nightmare kept popping into his head, along with his parents' incessant questions about his dreams. Absent-mindedly filling in the answers, it seemed like in no time the test papers were being passed forward to the teacher's desk. So that wraps up Einstein, Mr. Cole said. Mr. Cole was okay. Sam had attended the school since the start of last year. Coincidentally, so had Mr. Cole. The coincidence being that Mr. Cole had taught at his old high school back in Toronto, where he had been a teacher of his for some class or other, pretty much every year. He looked like he was about his parents' age, and had glasses and a beard which made him seem quite friendly and relaxed, almost cool. Until you see those ties, Sam thought. Today's shocker read, "It's sedimentary, my dear Watson." It was even more awful than his dad's jokes. Mr. Cole constantly pushed Sam harder than any other student, it seemed, always expecting him to get the top grade. Sam felt strangely compelled to make him proud and always tried his best. He might not top the class each time, but he did well. This week, as you know, we're recapping physics to prepare for your final exams, Mr. Cole said. Groans chorused from the other students in the class. It could be worse, Sam thought. Mr. Cole could have asked me to. Sam, refresh our memories, Mr. Cole said. What can you tell us about Newton's laws of motion? Um, Mr. Cole interjected, as in the unit symbol for micrometer? No, sir, Sam said. I'm sorry. I don't feel. Newton said that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's a good answer. If I was only asking about the third law, Mr. Cole said, what about the first and second? Sam bit his lip and thought about it. He knew it was something about motion being uniform unless changed by an object. Xavier answered. He was the brains of the class. He's somehow the popular kid, too. It was probably because he came from one of the richest families in the county. Money, brains, and he was good at sports. It was a lethal combo, it seemed, for the girls of the school, for with his dark hair and blue eyes he seemed to get all the attention all the time. Sam had been a little wary of him since day one because Xavier's father was Dr. Dark, the renowned psychiatrist and Sam's dream analyst. Xavier was droning on, explaining Newton's laws by relating them to his family's private jet in flight. Loser. Sam had Sam had been right about the motion thing, though. Great example, Mr. Cole said, drawing a diagram on the board. So as you can see, the applications of these laws to aerodynamics are. Sam tuned out as he looked out the window. The sun shone brightly upon the dewy grass. He blinked and got a start. A brilliant flash of light right behind his eyelids made him shift abruptly in his seat, causing his deskmate, Edward, to shift away from him. Weirdo, Edward whispered out of the side of his mouth. Sam ignored him, blinked again, but the vision was no longer there. Geez, he thought, what's with me today? He glanced absently out the window, trying to clear his mind, but then he saw it again, that masked face from his nightmare. The memories of the dream flooded back, little flashes in quick succession, like a fast-moving slide show. His friend Laura, time frozen, the shadowy figure standing over him, the mask, those eyes, that voice saying, "What?" "Sam!" He snapped back to reality and looked around. The whole class was looking at him. The blackboard was filled from top to bottom with notes and diagrams. Oh, great. I must have been daydreaming for a while. Sam, are you with us again? Mr. Cole asked. The class sniggered all around Sam. Yes, sir. Sam sat up straight, his face red, a mix of self-consciousness and anger. Well, then, why don't you come up to the board and give me your answer? Mr. Cole said, holding out the chalk. Sam scraped his chair back and walked to the front of the room, dodging a couple of outthrust legs intent on tripping him. At the board there was a series of different handwriting and equations. Quite a few students had obviously already had their turns before him. F equals mxa, where F is the equation, Sam? Mr. Cole said, sitting back on the edge of his desk. He watched Sam hesitate. Then his tone switched to one of disappointment. You weren't listening, were you? Yes, no, sir. I was. I've got this, Sam said, racking his brain for the answer he knew they'd covered a few weeks ago. F is force. The teacher nodded and Sam wrote the word on the board. M is mass, said Sam. And A is. He searched for the board, knowing the answer was right under his nose somewhere. I'll do it, Xavier called out from behind him. I've got it, Sam said. A is. Sam blinked, and again he saw the vision of the masked black-clad figure and a blinding light of fire radiating out, consuming the street, the people screaming. Sam? Mr. Cole was standing close, speaking softly. Are you okay? Sam looked from the board to his teacher. There was genuine concern on his face. It's just a headache, sir. I know the answer. I've got this, Sam yelled back at Xavier. A. Sam put the chalk to the blackboard. A stands for. The chalk began to dance against the board of its own accord. Sam thought his hand was shaking, but then realized it was the blackboard. The whole thing was vibrating, rattling. The wall, too. Then the entire room was rumbling, humming. A noise erupted, deafening, constant, thunder all around them. It was the most ear-splitting sound Sam had ever heard, and it was getting louder. Chapter 4. 3 helicopters buzzed directly over their classroom, massive gray-colored things with machine guns pointing out the sides. Cool! One of the students yelled out. It's an invasion! Cried another. No, there are military choppers. Awesome! Look at the guns! The tailing aircraft passed so close that some of the room's windows cracked and shattered, causing students to scream and duck for cover. But a moment later they had their noses pressed up against the remaining windows, save for Sam and Mr. Cole, who were still standing at the board, watching. No sooner had the helicopters touched down in the sports field than the cargo doors slid open and heavily armed soldiers in camouflage poured out. From the middle helicopter, a man in a suit emerged. It was a gray suit, white shirt, black tie. The man looked at the handheld electronic device, then looked up toward Sam's classroom and pointed it directly at them. The suited man and the soldiers set off in a flat-out run. Sam, Mr. Cole said out the side of his mouth, I think you should leave. Sam watched, stunned, as the man in the gray suit headed for the classroom. The soldiers who remained back at the helicopters, the rotor still spinning fast, had fanned out with their rifles trained all around as if expecting an attack from any direction at any moment. Sam! Mr. Cole said, taking Sam by both shoulders and shaking him, looking him directly in the eyes. Whatever happens, don't worry. It won't be for long. We'll find you, okay? Sam looked into Mr. Cole's concerned eyes. It was like he was seeing him for the first time. Sorry, what? Sam asked, not comprehending anything his teacher had just said. We'll find you? The students at the window were shouting and pointing, Mr. Cole's calls for calm falling on deaf ears. The classroom doors burst open and the headmaster rushed in. Everybody out! He yelled. Sam looked at Mr. Cole. Sam, there's no time to explain, Mr. Cole said urgently and quietly. Just don't lose hope. We'll come for you. I promise. The soldiers were at the windows, and everyone watched in horror as sparks erupted from around the window frames and more glass shattered to the ground. There was a crashing sound from the surrounding wall, and students spilled away from it, running for the door, shrieking. Debris from the cut-through masonry dusted their hair and clothes. Then there was an almighty bang! The force of the blast knocked Sam to the floor. He got to his hands and knees, but the room filled with thick dust that made it impossible to see. The other students were screaming and coughing. Through the ringing in his ears, Sam heard Mr. Cole calling his name, but he still couldn't see more than a few inches in front of him or tell where the voice was coming from. It became hard to breathe, and Sam kept low, crawling, choking from the smoke as he felt his way blindly along the edges of desks, tripping over school bags and fallen books to where he imagined the door to the classroom should be. "You can't take him!" Mr. Cole yelled, just as the smoke and dust began to clear. He was standing between Sam and the determined wall of thick-set soldiers, the wiry teacher right up in their impassive faces. "This says otherwise," the guy in the gray suit said. He passed the headmaster a note. "National security, highest priority," the suit announced, and then turned to the soldiers. "Take the boy. Let's move." 4 soldiers hustled towards Sam, who got to his feet and tried to look defiant, although he felt nothing but fear. Mr. Cole rushed to intervene, but the man in the suit stepped forward and jabbed a taser into his chest, the electric shock sending the teacher crashing heavily to the ground. The headmaster tried to regain some composure and began to protest loudly, but a soldier leveled another taser directly at him, forcing him to surrender. "He'll be fine," the man in the suit said to the headmaster, stepping over the quivering form of Mr. Cole, whose sickly pale face was turned toward Sam. Sam was picked up by 2 soldiers, but as much as he kicked and struggled and clawed at their arms, they remained completely unmoved. "Let me go!" he shouted at the soldiers, but they persisted, undeterred, carrying him through the makeshift doorway they'd cut through the wall. "Who are you?" Sam shouted at them. "What have I done?" The soldiers were silent as they marched Sam straight towards the whooping helicopters. Sam looked back and could see Mr. Cole steadily watching him. The teacher's mysterious words echoed in Sam's ears. "We'll find you." Chapter 5. This will be my last chapter for tonight. "Strap him in tight," the man in the suit ordered the soldiers. Sam's wrists were bound together in front of him with strong plastic ties, and he was lifted into the helicopter, harnessed firmly into position on a bench seat running along one side of the narrow cargo space. The soldiers sat facing front, just behind the pilot and co-pilot, on dedicated stations where big machine guns poked out the sides of the fuselage. Sam couldn't see whether the uniforms had any badges. As the 3 helicopters lifted off in unison, the world tilted and his stomach lurched. The man in the suit was talking into a radio headset. "We've picked up the 3rd one, returning to Seattle." Sam didn't even have time to wonder what the 3rd one meant before there was a tap on his knee. A teenage guy was seated next to him at the rear of the helicopter, and he seemed pleased to have gotten Sam's attention. His wrists were also tied. He, too, was strapped in tight. "Name's Alex," he said, smiling and offering a cuffed hand in greeting. He seemed a little older than Sam, shorter but bigger across the shoulders, with messed up brown hair and flushed cheeks. Although restrained, Alex almost seemed to be enjoying himself. Sam awkwardly offered a bound hand in return, lost in the strange moment, queasiness forgotten. "Her over there?" Alex said loudly into Sam's ear so as to be heard over the noise of the helicopter. "Won't give me a name, but I call her Dream Girl." Sam looked across the helicopter's cabin. A girl about his age sat, wide-eyed, unnerved at his arrival. She was tall and pretty, with plenty of black eye makeup and overall a bit goth-looking. Eventually she nodded at them, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "I'm Sam!" he shouted. The girl's eyes went even wider as if she recognized his name. Alex laughed. Sam's mind worked overtime to take everything in. He knew he had to start thinking about how to get out of there. His mind scrambled to imagine scenarios of what might happen when they touched down at base, and how he could get to safety. He knew he couldn't live with himself if his 2 fellow prisoners didn't factor into his plan. "Well, Sam," Alex said, "seems that we're all here, then." Sam looked from Alex to Dream Girl, completely confused. "What do you mean we're all here?" "Ask her," Alex said, then leaned as far as he could towards the girl. "You're the dreamer, so tell me. I'm dying to know what happens next." Dream Girl looked amazed and didn't answer. She just continued to stare at Sam. "Well, while she's playing mute, I'm going to try to get untied," Alex said into Sam's ear. Why don't you ask her to tell you what she told me?" Alex rubbed his plastic wrist ties against the metal leg of the bench seat. The burly soldiers were preoccupied with staring out their respective windows. "What's he talking about?" Sam asked her. The girl shook her head and replied, "You'll freak out." "Try me," Sam said. Again, she shook her head. "Well, just so you know, I'm already freaked out," Sam said. "In fact, I'm about 5 stages beyond it." "What's stage 6?" Alex said. "You poop your pants?" "That and more," Sam said, almost smiling. Something about Alex's cavalier personality reminded Sam of Bill, and he shook his head to dislodge the thought. He looked over to the guy in the suit who was still talking on the radio. The soldiers continued to watch out the windows. Sam leaned forward into the aisle towards the girl, his weight pushing against the harnesses that pinned him against the wall. "Please tell me, do you know what's going on here?" She looked from Sam to Alex. "Maybe a little," she said. "Told you," Alex said. "She's a freak." "You're a freak," she replied. "Yeah?" Alex said. "Well, I'm not the one who predicted all of this, am I?" Sam looked warily between them. "Predicted?" he said. "How?" "She was already in here when they loaded me on board," Alex explained, nodding over to the armed soldiers. "Soon as I got on, I went to talk to her, and she already knew my name. She said she knew where we were going and how they'd soon bring on a guy named Sam from your school." Then then you're with them," Sam said to her. "These soldiers?" "No," she replied. "It's nothing like that. My name's Eva Kennedy, and I was pulled out of high school just like you guys." "Then how do you know our names?" Sam asked. She looked down at the steel floor at her feet. "How does that work?" Sam could see her wrists were tied just as theirs were, so it made no sense that she'd be with those guys. But he didn't know if he could trust her. Maybe she's faking. He noticed a tear fall from her eye to her lap, and she looked up at Sam with wet eyelashes. "Because, Sam, I dreamed this," Eva said. "Last night. All of it. Beat for beat. Him, you, them, the helicopters. All of it." Sam felt like he was going to be sick. The fear on her face was genuine. She dreamed all this last night, and it's coming true? But does that mean my dream from last night could... "I dreamed this would happen," Eva said. "That the three of us would sit here, that we would talk like this until..." She checked her watch. "About now." Sam looked at Alex, who shrugged his shoulders and kept working away on wearing through his wrist ties. "That's all she told me, too," he said. "What else do you dream?" Sam asked. "Where did they take us?" Eva bit at her bottom lip. "What is it?" "They don't take us anywhere," she said, as a helicopter banked hard. Sam could see the other choppers, one out in the front, and the other to the side, the rotors beating fast against the air. He looked at the pilots, then imagined the three of them breaking free of their bonds and trying to overpower one or two of the soldiers, getting their weapons, forcing them to land and making a run for it. "Wait," Sam said to her. "What do you mean they don't take us anywhere?" "Yeah," Alex said. "That doesn't make any sense. We've got to be going someplace." Eva checked her watch again. Sam felt a heavy wave of dread in his stomach, the nausea back in full force. "Eva, what happens?" he asked. Eva looked at him, and with a steady voice she said, "You should hang on to something." The way she said it, the way she herself now held on to the bench seat and braced, made Sam grab hold of the bench and lean back, his legs pressing hard against the floor. "Got it," Alex said, revealing that he'd managed to wear through the plastic wrist ties. He looked up to find Sam and Eva staring back at him. "What?" "You need to hang on to something," Sam said. "What for?" "That," Eva said, motioning out the side window behind them. Alex and Sam craned around to see. "Incoming! Port side!" the co-pilot screamed into the cabin. "Brace, brace, brace!" Behind them, a ball of fire, streaming a plume of white smoke, was streaking towards the helicopter. In a second, they would make out a slender gray object, a missile, a supersonic bringer of death, looming in front of them. Fast. They had just seconds until impact. The pilot dipped sharply towards the earth. It was an emergency dive that twisted into a sideways tilt, hurtling towards a suburban street full of life. Sam's harness gave out and he found himself crushed next to Eva. The helicopter was almost completely on its side as it banked hard and fast towards the ground in the evasive maneuver. Sam could see that Eva, while looking ill from the aircraft plummeting, didn't seem scared. "How are you so calm right now?" Sam asked, straining to see if the missile was closing in. "Oh boy, it's there, coming in too fast to outrun." "Don't worry, Sam," Eva said, her voice almost serene. "We won't die." "How can you be so sure?" Sam asked, struggling to speak as the helicopter banked and turned haphazardly. "Because," Eva grimaced, "I've seen what happens next." Okay, that's the first part of this book. Guess that I'll probably read it again later. Join me Tuesday for Anna Green Gables, the next